Hello. So this is going to be a recap tutorial on all the animation stuff I showed on Thursday's class. The thing I showed on Thursday didn't quite go smoothly, so I wanted to do everything again really quickly just so that you guys have something to reference when you're making your own animation projects. So real quickly, in Rhino, I created a simple path animation that you can see in the other video. But just real quickly, this is what it's doing is basically a very simple, clean fly through or flyover of the St. Louis region. And what I did was I turned on this grid in the background just to make the camera tracking process easier when we bring this footage into After Effects. So I had already recorded this footage and it's now saved as PNGs on my desktop somewhere. So with After Effects, I'm going to here. Here's the After Effects browser. This window here is the project browser, this is the composition window, and this is the timeline. These are the three most important objects that you need to work with when using After Effects. Whenever you have a window selected, you can hit the tilde key on your keyboard to maximize it. So there's an easy way to focus on certain areas if you need more room to work in your composition. So to bring in footage, you simply go to the project browser here, you double click into the browser there and you just find the footage. So in this case, I saved that animation sequence in my documents. Then what you do is you basically select the first frame, you shift select everything else, then hit PNG sequence and then click import. Now this footage has come in as a piece of footage in your project. So then what you do is you take this footage and you drag it to this little button here, and that turns that footage into a composition. Basically, it creates a composition that matches the dimensions and it matches the time length of that footage itself. So you can kind of see it's now playing this flyover. I'm just going to hit play on the preview panel on the side just to get a sense of what it is, but you get the point. So with that all set up, I'm going to click the footage and I'm going to go to animation, track camera. And then what's going to do right now is I'm going to start analyzing every single frame and try to generate a 3D camera from this movement. So this usually takes about 2 or 3 minutes depending on how complicated the footage is. I generally recommend, if you want to camera track footage, to keep your footage as simple as possible. What I mean by that is don't have the footage be rotating like 360 degrees or have it be doing like somersaults or backflips. The camera should just generally have a very predictable movement to it, and that will make the camera tracking process a lot easier and you'll have a higher rate of success. So I'll let that run for a minute and then I'll unpause the video when it's done. Okay, so it worked. So now you see that when it's finished, all these tracking points pop up, and if I scrub through the timeline, you see that these tracking points match the map very nicely. So that's why adding this little grid in the background helps. It just creates more areas of contrast that the animation can, or the program can track the camera much more easily. So with that set up, I'm going to go to any frame, it doesn't matter, but I want to go to a frame where I can kind of see a lot of points at one time because I want to create a rectangle that matches the plane that everything is sitting on the most, and you get the best result by finding a lot of points. So with the animation selected and with 3D camera tracker enabled, you should see this little bullseye symbol on your map, and this will allow you to select the tracking points and turn them into objects in 3D space. So I'm just going to really roughly select a bunch of points like so, just by clicking and dragging, and then with those selected I just right click, then check create solid and camera. So now what you have done is you've created a solid rectangle that is projected onto the map. And that's this track solid right here. And you also have a 3D tracker camera that is the result of all that movement in the background. So with that all set up, I'm going to take this track solid here, right? And I want to turn this track solid into its own composition. That way I can start to put layers of the maps onto this rectangle here, then scale it and project it and make everything match the camera movement. So the way you do that is you right click on this track solid in the timeline and click on pre-compose. Just give it a name, call this one map STL for St. Louis. Make sure this first line is checked and make sure this all is set as is, then click OK. And now you've created a new composition. If you go to the project browser here, you see that you have new composition on site called map STL. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on map STL, go to composition settings, and I'm going to make the resolution of this map something really big, like maybe 6,000 pixels by 6,000 pixels. And the reason I want to do that is because I want this to have a high level of detail so that when it's projected onto the tracked map here, it doesn't lose detail as it's zooming in and out. Because this rectangle here is going to have the same resolution as whatever the resolution of the map STL is. So that's why just generally having this as a nice big resolution is okay. We're not going to render this as its own video because that'd be a really huge video. So that's that. But then what we're doing is we're going to bring in an Illustrator map. And so I have set up an Illustrator map in here, and it just basically has some basic layers of St. Louis laid out in a square map here. This is something that you just export straight from GIS. And you always want to make sure that the layers that you want to animate are organized neatly in its own separate layer. So water, parks, roads, and also all these Metrolink lines. This map is going to animate all the Metrolink expansion lines that is being planned in the St. Louis region. So always make sure that your layers are organized neatly, and if there's a layer that you don't need to animate, just collapse it all into one layer. Say for instance roads. I'm just going to animate roads at one time. So this every road feature is just in one layer in Illustrator. So with that set up, back in After Effects, I'm going to double click in the project window here, go to my desktop where I saved it, and go to this Illustrator file. I call it STL Region Scale. So check, with that selected, click Import. Import as a composition, and make sure the footage dimensions here is set to document size. Click OK. And now you've created a new composition with all those layers. We're not going to use this particular composition though. I just want to use actually the Illustrator layers that were brought in. So a folder came in with all the Illustrator layers. I'm going to go back to this map STL composition. This is the map STL composition. This is the one that was projected in here. And I'm going to drag in those layers into this map here. I'm going to select all the layers by dragging and selecting, and then right clicking, going to transform, fit to comp, and that just makes it fit the rectangle square of this comp here. And then I'm going to check this little, in the timeline, this little line here, the continuously rasterize button. And that's going to make sure that the resolution of this image is continuously rasterizing, because this is vector line work and it should have infinite resolution. So by checking this line here, it will always make sure that it's the sharpest possible quality whenever you're doing it. And then if you go back to the map animations here, you see that it is now brought in that layer on top of everything else. And the only thing I gotta do now is just gotta scale this and rotate it to match the dimensions of the map and the base. So I'm just gonna do that. So with this hand selection tool here enabled, I'm just gonna grab one of the handles on the side, and I'm just gonna shift drag to make it fit the scale of this thing here. And I'm just gonna do my best to make it match the base map here. So that looks about right there. And then maybe use these the X, Y, and Z handles here to move this up and down. Something like that. You could also, if instead of dragging on the map itself, is just to use the transformation tools in the timeline to get a more precise translation. So for instance, position here, like I can drag these numbers left and right, you see here on the timeline, to move it up or down by specific values. Also rotation as well. So say like the Z rotation, X, Y, Z, RGB. That's a good thing to remember. So RGB for X, Y, and Z. So I'm just gonna do quickly rotate this thing and make sure it matches the base animation. Okay, so after a minute or two of adjusting and rotating it, I kind of got it matching basically the background scale. So it's not perfect, but that's okay, because we're just gonna turn off the background animation anyway. All we wanted was that camera tracking movement that we got from Rhino. And so as you can see, it works pretty well. So now we have a rotating flyover map of the STL region. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to animate some of the lines in the map STL composition, and that's going to project onto this camera track. And then we have a nice clean but pretty cool looking graphic visualization. So what I'm gonna do now is we're gonna go back to the map STL layer here, and we'll start animating some layers. So as you might have recalled from the class tutorial, the way you animate anything in here is to go to the transformation line here, and then things you can animate are things like position, scale, rotation, opacity. Opacity is my favorite because it's just basically the simple act of fading in and out layers. So for instance, let's say we want to start here with, let's do the water layer first. Turn that on. Let's say we want the water layer to fade on first from white. So all I do is I click on the layer, I hit T for opacity, and then I'm gonna check this, click the little stopwatch here to enable the keyframes, and you see a keyframe has turned on here. And then with this slider over that keyframe here, I'm going to slide this to 0%. Then move forward like 2 seconds or something, and then slide it to 100%. And as you see, if I change this line here, it automatically adds a keyframe. So now it's going from 0 to 100% opacity, like so. I'm going to do the same thing for, let's say, the road layer here. Let's have that, hit T on that. I'm going to do, say, maybe after the water turns on, I'll have the roads turn on as well, using this opacity. So water, roads, and then let's do parks as well. I'm moving the layers in order from bottom to top so that the most relevant layers on top are on top. So parks, do the same thing, hit T, check the opacity stopwatch, 0%, and then make that 100%. So you see what's animating now is these layers slowly turning on, like so. This is a nice clean way to animate various objects. One thing I might recommend doing is to, in order for the transitions to not be so linear, is to add easy ease. It's kind of hard to say. Basically what you do is you select the keyframes you want to apply that to, right click, go to keyframe assistant and do easy ease, right? And if you do that, basically it just adds a nice curve to the time frame, so it doesn't like go from a linear transition from opaque to solid. It's hard to see with the opacity, but it's actually a nice adjustment. So I'm going to do that for all these guys here, easy ease. And also you can do is you can just select these and hit the F9 key, and that does the same exact thing. Okay, so that's all good. Parks, roads, and the river. If you hit the U key, that brings up all the layers in the transformation panel that you keyframed. So that's a nice way to keep your workspace nice and clean. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate all these Metrolink expansion lines. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this road layer here. It's kind of heavy. I'm going to just hit the U key, right? And then make the transformation from 0 to, not to 100%, but actually make it from 0 to 50%. That way the road layer isn't so dense, right? Because it was getting a little hard to see some of these other layers on top. Okay. So I'll start with the original Metro line here, and if you want to animate paths, I'm gonna go back to here. Actually, also make the park layer 50% as well. It's actually kind of dense looking, or 45%. So if you want to animate paths, you just right-click on the layer here, and you want to click Create Shapes from Vector Layer. And then what that has done is basically it's taken the lines from this Illustrator file here and turned it into Afterworks lines. So this new shape has popped up above the previous Illustrator line. You can actually delete this original Illustrator line because you actually don't need it anymore. And then we can do is if you expand this and go to contents, you see the group 1, 2, 3. These are the actual paths from Illustrator, but they've been brought in as After Effects paths now. So now what you can do is you can click on this little add button next to the contents line here and do trim paths. Then with trim paths here, you can basically animate the start and end point of those lines there. So let's just do something very simple. Let's hit the end stopwatch and make that 0%. Then move forward a couple of seconds. And then make that end percentage 100%. Then I'm just going to select those keyframes, hit F9 to add an easy ease in. And then let's preview that. So the way you preview is you select this, this big thick preview line here, and I'm just going to kind of crop it to that area there. And then I'm going to hit the tilde key in the composition window and fit this, then hit the space bar. And then you can see the result of that animation. So I'm going to hit the tilde key again to come back out. So that's all great. So now I'm going to hit the U key to collapse that. And let's do these other 3 layers real quick. So I'll do the same exact process that I did for this with these other 3 layers. So I'll do that and then I'll unpause the video. Okay, so I've done that now. So you can kind of see basically I've animated using the trim paths command for all these lines here. So I'll quickly go here, hit the tilde key, hit the space bar, and that's, you can kind of see what the final result is kind of doing right now. So the Metrolink line is being drawn, and then the Metrolink extensions are being drawn, and then the north-south line is being drawn, and then the bus rapid transit line as well. So that's been done, and now you can see we've basically done that. But what you kind of notice now is that basically it's a 30-second animation, but I only really have done my work up to, say, 20 seconds. So let's say you want to take these keyframes and you want to stretch it out to 30 seconds. I'm just going to hold shift and select all these keyframes. And then I'm going to hold the Alt button on my keyboard, then just drag this over like so. And now it's kind of stretching the keyframes. I'm just going to stretch it to say like 28 seconds or something like that. That way it fills out the timeline, and so it's not going to have an area at the end where nothing is happening. We want this animation to kind of continue throughout the entire 30 seconds. I'm going to quickly save this project so I don't lose my work. Okay, and then go back to the animation here. Now if you scrub through the timeline, now you see all those animations that we have set up have now been projected onto this map here, and it looks kind of cool. So this is almost ready to go. Maybe let's do a few last things and then we can render this video. So let's add some text as well. This is something I didn't show during the tutorial in class, so this is actually a nice thing. So what you can do is you can say, like, let's add a text box on here to say, like, this is the Metrolink. So I go to the text tool here, horizontal type, and then just draw a text box. I'm going to call this one Metrolink. That font is like a white font, so I'll make it, let's make it an orange font. I'll use the eyedropper here to match that orange color. And then you can choose any font you like. Let's say like a bold. Let's call it Metrolink existing or something. And then what you want to do is with this selected, whoops, is you want to check this box right here in the timeline, this 3D box. And what that does is basically it's now converted that text into 3D space. So now if I spin around here, you see that text is now following the movement of the camera. And then basically what you gotta do is now you gotta rotate and move this object to kind of fit within the region that you want. So what I'm gonna do is I'm basically gonna use the rotation tools just to kind of make it sort of fit. This might take some time to get right, but you can get it right. Maybe this needs to be a little bit higher. I'm not going to dwell on that, but that looks okay to me. And then let's say you want this text to fade in when this line is being drawn. So what we do is, let me select this thing here, move it over a bit. I'm actually going to take this text timeline here, and I'm going to drag the red box that represents how many frames this thing is actually being shown to kind of where I want it to start. And then I'll make it, crop it to where I want it to end as well. So now you can see it just kind of pops up there and then disappears like so. One trick I'll show you guys that I really like is the text typewriter tool. So if you go to effects on the right hand side and you go to animation presets and you go to text, you can actually go to, let's see, animate in, and then there is the typewriter tool here. And if you drag this over, let's just drag it over here like that onto the timeline itself. What this does is basically it writes out the Metrolink extension kind of like a typewriter, and this is that nice effect that you kind of see often is like text being typed out. So I'm gonna do that, and actually I'm also going to do one more thing, is I'm going to have this text fade out as the next line shows up. So with this line selected, hit T for opacity, right? Set a keyframe, then shift hold and drag it to the end of that, then make the opacity 0%. So it has a nice type in and fade out. Okay, so that's basically our animation. You would do more work in order to accomplish the story that you want to tell, but this overall is pretty good. And then what you would do is you also would add an audio track in the background. I won't do it for this particular instance. I just want to quickly go through some of the keyframing stuff. But once you're happy with your final result, which I am in this case, you want to go to Composition and click on Add to Adobe Media Encoder. So click on that. And now Adobe Media Encoder CC will open. And this is basically the rendering platform that Adobe uses to render most video output. So if you used Adobe Premiere, this is what you would use to render video from. And so you just wait a second and it's going to pop up in your render queue right here. Just wait a second. I'm not clicking anything. I'm just letting it wait, and then it pops up here like so. And then most important thing you always want to do is you want to make sure that the format is not set to H.264. There's all these other formats here that you could use, but really the industry standard for video is H.264. This will give you a good balance between high quality video and also highly compressed video as well. This won't make your video like 3 GB in size or anything like that. And then in preset, you just want to set to whatever preset you want it to be. In this case, I'll do a 720p HD video, like here, and then just find a location where you want to save it. So in this case, I'll just save it on my desktop. Animation A is okay. Also, you could also just click on Match Source High Bitrate, and that would just basically match the resolution of the composition that you're working with in After Effects. But I'll do actually I'll do 1080p. Why not? Okay, so then when you're ready to go, you click on play, and then start rendering the video. And this usually takes about, depending on how complicated the video is, I want to say 5 minutes. So I'll let that run. Actually, I just noticed I made a mistake again. I made the same mistake during class. The background and the output preview is black. So I'm going to stop that. Yes. No. Yes. I'm going to stop that rendering. Go back to After Effects. Sorry. And then you want to make sure you make a white background. I'm not sure why this happens, but you always want to make a background on the video. So I'll make a background layer shape by going to this rectangle tool here, drag it to the bottom here, and I'm going to make that a white fill, which it already is. So now it's just basically a white background. So I'm going to save this composition, add to Adobe Media Encoder. It's popped up again. Let's just keep the same settings as is. I'll save it on my desktop. I click play. There we go. Now it's white. Okay, and it has finished. So now if I go to my desktop, you have an animation here. Right now it's 74 megabytes, so that's not bad at all. So there it is. And if we had music in the background, there'd be music playing in the background. But as you can see, as it's running, it's a pretty nice quality video. Very professional looking. I mean, it needs a bit of work, obviously, to make it more professional looking, but you can already begin to see how simple it is to begin to animate your GIS maps using After Effects. So that's it. Thank you very much.